So there are two predominant theories of contract. The first idea is sort of a philosophical idea, and this is associated with, in particular, Randy Barnett and Charles Fried, which is the idea of contract as consent. And the idea here is focusing on the autonomy of the individual and their voluntary consent to an obligation to another party that can be enforced by the government. So in many ways, you could think of this as a simple extension or application of the idea of John Locke in the idea that when people enter into civil society in a government relationship, they only assume those obligations either explicitly or tacitly that they freely and voluntarily assume. That is contract as consent. An alternative idea, the economic theory of contract, and the economic theory of contract says that it's not so much a matter of consent and what the parties agree to do, but instead it's a matter of parties' external manifestations. And it has to do with basically a social utilitarian calculus, which is that if you take certain objectively verifiable, reasonable actions that look like you are agreeing to be bound, then you can be bound. So these are two different theories, both in terms of what we call the positive theory, which is explaining the underlying logic of common law and the doctrines, as well as the normative theory of contract, which is what should contract try to do and what kind of promises should be enforceable and under which conditions. So under these different theories, the policy, the normative goals of the law are very distinct. For the idea of contract as consent, or a consent theory of contract, basically the idea here is it is designed from a philosophical perspective to actualize parties' autonomy, their reason, and their kind of dignity as individuals, to be able to voluntarily bind themselves to legally enforceable obligations. Under the idea of contract, and the economic idea of contract, the normative idea here is that the purpose of law is essentially utilitarian, which is to, on net, make it easier for people as a whole to be able to accomplish their goals. And what that means is that under that system, you might end up with more people who end up entering into a contract and not realizing it, or thinking they've entered into a contract that they actually haven't. That idea is basically an economic idea that the rules are designed for the sort of long run of transactions, opposed to focusing on the individual will and conscious of intent of individual parties to a particular transaction.